For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dan Adair. I'm the current president of the Wild River Audubon, and we were chatting a few minutes ago about our chapter. This is our very first Zoom meeting, public meeting. We normally hold a lecture series in the fall and winter, and then take a break in the summer. People do more outdoors and birding. We participate in the Christmas bird count, which will be held on December the 19th. This year. We meet at the Center City Church, and that's another item to look on our website, Wild River Audubon, or our Facebook page. But tonight, we'll get a couple announcements as we move through this. But tonight, being our first Zoom meeting, the first thing I'll say is you don't need to wear a mask. If you want to wear a mask, it's okay to wear a mask, but you don't have to wear a mask, okay? Secondly, I wanted to say this is a BYOB event. Last year, we were holding these at the Uncommon Loon, a brewery in Chisago City, but obviously it's a Zoom meeting, so you have to bring your own beer to this one. Let's see here. So basically, we'll be doing this until we're out of the COVID woods, and tonight, we'll learn more about our local woods and this beautiful Saw-whet owl. So I'd also like to make a couple more announcements here. On November 7th, we will be having our annual fundraiser birdseed sale in the parking lot of Brinks Market in Chisago City. We offer the seed you'd find commonly at Peterson's Mill in North Branch. They work with us. Joe Sawson has a special treat this year. He has a lot of feeders that he's going to donate. So he probably has a truck full of feeders. So we're going to have some feeders. In addition, a lot of times you get some artwork donated from Dave Spahn sometimes. You never know. So it's always a fun day. And we feel like we can pull this off safely to load up your seed, and it's like I say, it's a fundraiser, our only fundraiser. Also, we're trying to set up a date in November, a little bit later, to get Jay Drake Hamilton from Fresh Energy to talk to us about climate change. We've got a couple of dates in mind, so stay tuned for that. I mentioned the bird count, the Christmas bird count on December 19th. And that's basically our events for the next little while. Oh, there's one more event in November, November 3rd. Yes, November 3rd, mark your calendars, there's an election. So we ask that you vote environment November 3rd. And I think you know what to do. So anyway, I will now turn it over to our Vice President, Michelle Terrell.
Dan, I would like to do some Zoom protocol first, if I may. Great. And then we'll hand it to Michelle. This is Dawn. I'm on the board of the Wild River Audubon, and your Zoom host. I'll be hiding in the shadows here, working backstage soon. So I am asking people, or if you're not sure how to do it, I am muting you. And that gives us much better sound quality for our speaker. It also, I won't mute you, Michelle. I am also asking you if to turn off your video so that we have better connections for our speaker. Thank you, Dan. And to find those controls, you can go down to the, typically it depends on what device you're using, but often it's down at the bottom. When you put your arrow down on the bottom, a strip, like a film strip kind of comes up, if you're old enough to remember what film strips are. And there's a mute button down on the far left corner of the screen, and right next to it is the stop video. So if you all would do that, would be great. Our presenter will be sharing her screen with us, full screen. So I'm not sure if you will actually see her or just hear her, but we are very happy at this turnout on our very first online virtual meeting. And I think there was one more thing that Michelle, you can talk about about questions at the end in the chat. The chat is also down on the bottom, typically on the bottom, but part of the film strip. And we're asking people to put your questions in the chat, and you may be able to raise your hand too, if you need to. We are recording this meeting per request of a couple of people. So if you have any issues about that, we suggest you don't attend, I guess. But we will be having it available. We're not sure how we're just going to do that at this point. So we will discuss that. So after the meeting. All right. So Michelle, I'm going to pass it to you.
All right, thanks, Dawn. Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Terrell. I'm the Vice President of Wild River Audubon. Some of you may also know me from the MOU, the Minnesota Ornithologists Union. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker, Jennifer Vieth. Jen is the Executive Director of the Carpenter Nature Center. If you don't know Carpenter, it's located in the Southeast Metro, and it has two beautiful campuses, one on the Minnesota side and one on the Wisconsin side of the St. Croix River. Among Jen's many skills, she has an extensive background working with raptors, including serving as a past program director for the U of M's Raptor Center. And tonight we're fortunate to have her share with us her knowledge of the diminutive northern Saw-whet owl and the research they've been doing at Carpenter to learn more about them. So welcome, Jen, and if you could hold your questions either to the end or put them in the chat, and I'll relay those to Jen at the end. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Michelle, and thanks, everyone. With the pandemic, I've held a billion Zoom meetings, but given very few Zoom presentations. So be sure to give me hints if I'm talking too quickly, or if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them at the end. And I know these can get tedious if people drag on, and I can talk about owls for hours. So I'll try to keep it moving pretty quickly. So let's see if we can switch the first slide, and there we go. I wouldn't be a good executive director if I didn't help you fall in love with Carpenter. So this is the view that I see looking out the window of the office. Right now it's just a wash in fall colors. The Nature Center was started by Tom and Edna Carpenter. They had this beautiful home on the bluffs of the St. Croix, right near the confluence, and they wanted to leave it for future generations to enjoy. And their dream came true when we opened the Nature Center in 1981 under the direction of my predecessor, Jim Fitzpatrick. About 30 years ago, we added the Wisconsin campus, which is beautiful. It's very different than the Minnesota campus, just these waving prairie grasses and remnant habitat. It's about 300 acres. And in about 2 weeks, we will be doing some clearing of an area to put a visitor center there. We've heard from the community that they would really like flush toilets in a warm room when they visit. And so within the next year, hopefully you can come and visit our beautiful visitor center. We've seen more and more guests throughout the pandemic. And I think somebody's on the speaker. Thank you. So it'll be a great place to visit and get out in nature and just reconnect with the natural world. So the three things that we spent a lot of time doing is environmental education. In a normal year, we serve about 25 to 35,000 people. We restore habitat. And then we also have programs for lots of different age groups, including summer camps and adults. The Nature Center, as I said, reaches about 36,000 people in a normal year. This year is just crazy. We've restored over 725 acres of habitat and are always interested in partnering to restore more, but we know those projects take a lot of time and a lot of thought. And then we only have 10 staff and a part-time staff to do all this work, and our budget's about $1 million, and most of it comes from gifts and donations and sponsorships. So that was your introduction to Carpenter, a quick view of the great stuff, the great views. After releases, we collaborate with the Raptor Center, and now to birds, because that's why we're here. Carpenter has been banding birds for nearly 40 years. Some of our birds have been recovered in South America, on the East Coast in Nova Scotia, and our juncos have been recovered in Alaska. So if you take anything away from any project that I talk about with Carpenter and our research, It's how connected we are here in the St. Croix Valley to impacts around the world. So the juncos that are stopping at your feeder now may breed in Alaska. The golden wing warblers, we've had one that was recaptured 3 years in a row on its migration south. Our wood thrush end up in Venezuela and Honduras, saw-whet owls in Nova Scotia. So really how we treat our habitat impacts birds all around the world. And we're very proud we are a partner in making Hastings the first bird city in all of Minnesota. And one quick non-owl research project that we're super excited about, and especially for where you are up near Wild River, the wood thrush study, this species has been declining. We put little GPS geolocators on the bird, and let's see, I don't know if you can see my cursor. It's a little backpack transmitter, and the birds that breed in Minnesota were recovered down in Central America, so Venezuela, Honduras. And they spent the most time in shade-grown coffee plantations, so choose your coffee wisely. I guess that's the message there. But really cool research we can do to help improve the quality of bird lives. So let's get to the important part. So owls. We've been studying saw-whet owls for 7 years. I brought it up to Jim Fitzpatrick as the head bander before he retired, and he wasn't game for staying up late at night, but the second he retired, he was game. So we kicked it off in 2014. There are 216 species of owls in the world. Most fall into your typical owl family that look like the eagle owl and our great horned owl. And then there's 18 in the barn owl, bay owl, and grass owl family. In Minnesota and Wisconsin, if everybody could raise their hand, I know they would know how many owls are there. You guys are all great birders. We have 12 owl species you can find in the state of Minnesota and the state of Wisconsin, although some it would be pretty uncommon to find them. So burrowing owl is a tough one to find. Barn owl, there's one in Saxon Bog, I believe it was last year, but they're a little tricky to find. But we're focused on saw-whet owls. And so for those who don't know a lot about owls, these are just some fun facts about owls. Silent flight for most of them, low-level light vision, excellent hearing, predatory forward-facing eyes, and those amazing zygodactyl toes. And so now we get to our saw-whets. So you can see the adult saw-whet poking out of the nest cavity, and then all those juvenile saw-whets. The saw-whets change out of that really cute cinnamon and chocolate brown plumage before they migrate. Speaking with a researcher, Bill Lane, he has only ever banded one of that plumage owl in his nets in all the years he's been banding. We've never found one in our study in the 7 years that we've been banding. So they're already looking like that adult before they migrate. So their scientific name, and I do not speak Latin well, but Aegolius, it means bird of ill omen, which is kind of funny when you look at how tiny and cute these things are. So they're a bird of ill omen, and the catechus has to do with they were first discovered in Acadia in Nova Scotia. And then this is a lot of text you don't have to read, but they're one of our most common owls. We don't think of them as common because they're great at camouflaging, but they are found pretty widespread. They are monogamous, but it all depends on how much food is around. So there are cases of polygyny and even polyandry. So one male with multiple females or one female with multiple males when there's enough food. They're cavity nesters. You can put up a nest box and they will use it. The male takes care of getting the food and the female incubates the egg. They're not crepuscular. So unlike the barn owl that you'll see hunting a lot at dawn and dusk, these birds are nocturnal hunters. They don't live all that long. So they have a pretty low survival rate in their first few years. But if they make it past that, the longevity record is 9 years and 5 months. And in captivity, they've been known to live up to 16 years. They primarily eat small rodents, but I'll show you a photo about their diet in a minute. They are related to boreal owls, which will come back in the presentation in a little bit. We'll sort of bring up some boreal facts that sort of elucidate some of the mysteries about the owl migration. There are 2 distinct subspecies. One you can find in Haida Gwaii, which is formerly the Queen Charlotte Islands. That stays right there, it doesn't migrate. The other saw-whet owl subspecies that's found all over the rest of the continent, migrates through, but they don't mix. And then there's also an unspotted saw-whet owl. And they like coniferous forests, but we have great luck banding them in migration in deciduous forests as well. And the last cool thing is they have such great asymmetrical hearing that their skull is actually asymmetrical. So you can see that lopsided skull photo that helps them triangulate sound and hunt their prey at night much better. So hopefully I'm not going too fast. Somebody will have to pop up a hand or signal if I'm going a little too quick. So when I gave a presentation up in Cable, I got all the way to the end and somebody said, what do they eat? Which I missed explaining. So I've got a great slide. They love rodents, things like field mice, voles, and even juvenile chipmunks. They'll eat other birds, so cute wrens, things we like to get on our bird lists. They'll even eat other owls. And there's a report of them eating a pigeon, which that sounds like a quite ambitious owl. And then they'll eat all sorts of invertebrates. They'll even eat carrion and arthropods. So, and intertidal isopods as well. So lots of varied diet. And here's the big question that Project OwlNet was trying to look at. Are they a rare resident? Are they migratory? Are they nomadic or eruptive? So we think of our great gray owls that'll erupt every few years, or even snowy owls. Are these little owls actually, do they have a migratory route that they stick to every year, or is it just a rare occurrence? And so if you look at the birds of North America, they've got all these great question marks about their range. So it's kind of fun to work on a species that still has some mysteries. And there were two events that sort of had scientists thinking that maybe these birds are actually migrating. And they both happened in 1903 and 1906, and both on Lake Huron. So there was a steamboat crossing the lake, and all of a sudden some owls landed on the deck in the middle of the night, which made them think that maybe they were moving somewhere, because it is kind of weird to have a few owls in the middle of the lake. And then in 1906, there was a big storm. It came up suddenly. A lot of birds were killed and were washed at the edge of the shore. The researchers ran out and started documenting all these bird deaths to get an idea of the species migrating through. And in amongst all the warblers and sparrows, there were 24 saw-whet owls. So that gave them an idea that migration was happening. And then debate continued until about the 60s, when people started to ban them using targeted banding. Before that, everybody who was banding, passive songbird banding, would get a few owls in their nets at that time of year when they're migrating. But once they started using that lovely tooting saw-whet owl call, the research really turned around. And that's when Project OwlNet started in 1994 to collaborate, standardize protocols, and really bring this mystery to light. So being an MOU board member, I love being able to pull up Wisconsin Breeding Bird Atlas and Minnesota Breeding Bird Atlas and MOU data. And if you look at the occurrence maps for saw-whet owls from the Minnesota Ornithologists Union, it gives you a pretty good idea that they are migrating through the state in the spring and the fall. You know, the summer they're really concentrated in the northern part, but spring and fall they're throughout the state. And so at Carpenter, when we got started, like any good research group, we came up with all sorts of hypotheses. Our first one is really funny. We wanted to know if they migrate through the St. Croix Valley, specifically C and C. We hadn't documented the owls on the site yet. And so, you know, are they even there? And then we said, well, if we're going to do it in Minnesota, we have to ask the same question for Wisconsin. And then we wanted to know if the long-eared owls are migrating through the valley. We know that they were wintering often at Afton State Park in the Cedars. So are they moving all the way through Carpenter? And then how does the St. Croix River work as a funnel? Is it a big enough riverway to act like the Mississippi Flyway or not? And do the owls migrating on either shore in Minnesota or Wisconsin, do they come from different breeding populations? And then how do the weather patterns affect the movements? You think of those big storms we had come through the other day from the west. Does that blow all the owls to Wisconsin, or how's that work? And so we set up some sites. In Minnesota is where we started. And so you'll see all those red dots on the screen. We set nets that first year all over the place. We looked for good habitat, conifers, and we tried and tried. And the only place that we reliably caught owls was right outside the administration building in this little clump here. And I don't know if you're able to see the cursor circling. So it's the one right circling over center on Carpenter Nature Center's name. So by the time we picked up the Wisconsin campus monitoring, we were already smart. And so we set the nets right near a little hutch, and that's the only place we tried there. So our very first night in 2014 met with success. We had 5 owls grace our nets and 1 what we call a foreign retrap. And the other owl researchers on Project OwlNet said, go out and get yourself a lottery ticket. That's a whole lot of good luck on your first night. So a foreign recap means that we got somebody else's owl in the net. And our researchers like to say the owl already had jewelry. So pretty cool, rare occurrence. So after that first night, we started to do even more research, and we went and hung out with the folks up at Hawk Ridge and learned a lot from them as well. But the best Saw-whet owl banding nights are when it's not a full moon. They don't migrate very well when it's super bright. And it turns out they don't migrate really well on the new moon night, but in between, it's great. Wind is a factor. If it's too windy, you don't get as many owls. And so one night on the listserv, as these owl researchers are staying up until 2 in the morning, somebody asked the question, well, how do you know if it's too windy? And one of the researchers responded that they used the Pringle factor. And I'm thinking, cool, who's Dr. Pringle? Well, Dr. Pringle was how many Pringle chips you could stack on a branch without them blowing off. So 7 Pringle chips on a branch was too windy. So the owl researchers have crazy senses of humor. And this is so much more fun to talk about in person, so I can see everybody smiling. The best time of night. So folks like the folks at Wolf Ridge or Whitefish Point, they have dedicated research teams they hire that stay up all night, dusk to dawn, and the owls. At Carpenter, it's volunteers and myself, and we have jobs that we have to get to by 8 a.m. And so we band usually from sunset until midnight, unless of course it's a really good night, and then you'll see on the chart in front of you that we do stay up till 2 and then try to be functional at work the next day. I am going to throw in some data from our friends at the North Central Bird Observatory in Victoria, Minnesota, just to show you some similarities. They've been banding for, I believe it's like 2 years longer than us, so their data is a bit more robust. But our peak time roughly coincides with their peak time. Right around 9 o'clock, 9:30 is when we usually get the most owls. But as the season progresses, we do end up getting some early owls, and you'll see their early owls are almost negligible, but some of our big spikes were actually starting at 7:30 at night. So that's sort of an idea of when the owls come through Carpenter. I believe from everything I've read, there's also a kind of migratory push in the nets just before sunrise as the owls are settling in, but we're not awake at that point. So their Saw-whet owl banding comes with some hazards. So the first is, I've alluded to, is sleep deprivation. It's tough work, and we start being goofy as time goes on. The second is we found out the first year that Carpenter Nature Center also has a robust population of southern flying squirrels. They get caught in your net, and my predecessor wisely told me as I tried to get one out, don't worry, they don't bite. At which point it embedded those nasty little teeth in my finger and proceeded to bite 3 of us. So they're quite nasty, and they'll chew holes in your net, so big danger. Hippoboscid flies, if anybody in the group has done bird work, rehabilitation work, you know these things called flat flies are absolutely disgusting, and they are obligate parasites. So if you blow on the bird's feathers to see if it has any migratory fat, these things come out and they slide under your clothes, and they're just disgusting. So they're another danger. So flat flies just gross us all out. And then one year we had a giant rooster attacking us at the net. So it's always an adventure when you're out at a nature center from dark to midnight. Back to the best Saw-whet banding night. So if you're going out and about, want to look at owls, when's the best time to listen for them at night? going through the Ned Smith Center. Their median date is right around October 31st. Looking at our data through 2018, it's kind of spread out. We usually get our first owls right around the 27th of September. This year we got them a few days earlier, but not a whole lot earlier. We have got owls all the way until the end of November, but usually it's far too cold to keep banding and our spouses are not pleased. So we usually quit right before Thanksgiving. We don't want to be disowned for sure. And so here at the bottom, I've got the North Central Bird Observatory's data. And you'll see that Ned Smith's median date and our median date are fairly similar. And for some reason, out in Victoria, they get most of their owls way before we do. A question I don't know the answer to yet. Banding, these are the band sizes. And if you've ever worked in banding, the banders are very concerned about the health and welfare of their birds, and the banding lab is very responsive. So typically raptors will get a 4, or raptors of this size would get a 4 lock on. It's got a little flange that you fold over. But the Saw-whet owl banders said that's way too much metal to put on these guys. So then they were supposed to put on the 4As. Those are called butt end bands. They come together, the 2 butt ends of the bands. And the Saw-whet owl researchers said, no, those are still too big. And so now there's what we call a 4 short that are made just for Saw-whet owls. So they get these small diminutive bands that they just go right around the tarsus. If we get a rare band, a recapture band, we'll document it with photo evidence. And so that's the banding process. Then we have to figure out if it's a guy or a girl. In most raptors, males are smaller than females, and saw-whets are not an exception. So the females are about 25% larger than the males. And there's a great chart where they put known males and known females on the chart. You can see there's some overlap in the middle. So we do get a fair amount of unknowns. And we weigh them in their little owl bags on a kitchen scale. And they average weigh about 8 Oreo cookies, as you've probably seen in the PR. And just in case you're ever curious, an Oreo cookie is 11.3 grams. So most of our owls are between 80 and 104 grams. For our 6-year results, since we're in our 7th year, we've had about 79% of the birds have been female and only 7% male. If we look at our 2 sites, what I find really curious is, and it could be just skewed numbers just because we're so young and new to this, but our Wisconsin campus gets far fewer males than the Minnesota campus. So we have 8% males right now at the Minnesota campus and only 6% at Wisconsin, and preliminary numbers from 2020 are keeping that trend alive. So if you're looking at this, you're wondering, where are the guys? You know, why are only the girls migrating? And maybe do the males and females migrate at different times of year? Checking that little chart, it doesn't seem to be a seasonal thing. What's fascinating is this goes back to that piece about boreal owls. They know that boreal owl males migrate less distance, they stay closer to their breeding territory. And so we believe that's what's going on with saw-whet owls. The females and the young move, and the males don't migrate as far, they stay closer to their breeding territory, which should be good news for Minnesota, Wisconsin, or Minnesota's higher rate of males. We should have breeding birds around, but so far no luck on that. So then here's one of the most fun aha moments if you ever attend a banding program. Back in 1982, Bruce Colvin discovered that owls' feathers fluoresce pink under black light. And so hatch year, all the feathers are the same age. None of the porphyrin is worn off. They're all pink. And as they get older, the pink wears off and they get new generations of feathers. So 2nd year, you can see the 2 generations. And after 2nd year, you can see 3 generations of feathers. So how old are the owls moving through the St. Croix Valley? Well, remember I said that many die in their 1st year. So that dispersal of the young birds, as you would expect, most of the birds going all the way down to Carpenter are hatch year. So 189 hatch year compared to 1/3 year. And then we wanted to know, do they migrate at different times? Well, so far, doesn't look like it. And from what we've researched from other centers, they don't seem to have a pattern of hatch years migrating earlier or later. And then we wanted to know, do the hatch years versus after hatch years vary year to year? And this is a cool piece. So in 2016, it was an eruption year, 77.5% hatch years moving through. 2018 was an abysmally low year. We had 3 birds on the Minnesota campus, and they came from the 3 different age groups that were most likely to see 33% hatch year. So that gives you an idea of year to year, there's a lot of variation. And this year, right now, our rate stands at about 75% hatch years for 2020, which tells you that we're in a boom year when these birds are dispersing. So it's a great year to go out and see if you can see a saw-whet owl or listen for one on migration. So there's a few other studies we look at. Some folks look at the alulas, which are those sort of almost like thumb-like flight feathers. Some look at how much white on the facial disc, and we're part of a study with Purdue to look at the owl's eye color. They vary significantly. Some are golden, orange yellow, and some are bright yellow. I just talked to the researcher this week, and doesn't seem to vary with age or with sex, but they do think it might vary with body condition. There's a preliminary study that says that might be the case, but it's all still early to tell, but they have beautiful variation in their eye color. And then there's another study we've been involved in. They take a feather sample and they evaluate the DNA in the feather sample, and they wanted to know, are there subpopulations in the country? The family units migrate together, and unfortunately it's very depressing. Even though they look really cute, like they're related, they don't migrate together. The moms don't migrate with their offspring, and there's a lot of genetic variation across the country. So the owls that we find in the nets aren't brother, sister, or parents. And then which routes do they use? I made this map get really messy, so bear with me. This is just a cool map from Bird Studies Canada, but in general, they'll go down the Ohio River Valley, the East Coast, the West Coast, they go around Superior, and then south and east. But one of the coolest studies I read recently is there's a breeding population, and I'll just click through to it, sort of north and west of us, and then another one north and east of us, and the birds tend to move together as they migrate south. And so where are St. Croix Valley owls from? So you can see the map there with us on there. We've had birds from Duluth by band recoveries. We've had birds from even further up in Tofty. And we've had birds from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan migrate and get caught in our nets. And then some from Wisconsin and Michigan. So those are sort of where our foreign recaptures are coming from. But then we were wondering, well, where are our birds ending up? Is there this barrier that just eats the owls as soon as we release them? Finally, we started getting band recoveries of our birds. So Omaha, Nebraska, and then down in Rochester, one made it there in 48 hours. And then finally, up in Prince Albert, he got one of our birds. So it was really cool to see our birds being found all over the centers where we were getting the owls from. So really cool. And then this year already, we've got a few birds that we've recaptured. One of the coolest stories is last year was doing a program on owls. We got an owl in the net that had a deformed pupil. It was sort of lumpy looking with black on the side as opposed to the round black pupil. And her beak was actually crossed. She'd been in an accident. And we debated about whether to release her or take her to the Raptor Center. But as the injuries appeared to be old and healed, we released her, let her go on her migration. The team up at Carpenter Nature Center just recaptured her last night. So she's made the southern migration, gone back and bred this summer, and is migrating south again. So cool success story. So here's a fun set of slides about their population cycle. When you sign up for Project OwlNet, you're supposed to be sign up for 5 years because the species has a 4-year boom and bust cycle. And so that 5 years should allow you to capture the cycle in your area. And you're supposed to keep the same relative amount of effort those years. So you're kind of comparing apples to apples. So this is our first 5 years of being in the study. You can see 2016 was definitely a boom year. And then we looked also at the number of nights that we were banding to get those numbers. And it's much easier to get owl researchers to come out when you're actually catching owls. But in 2018, when we had that low year, we really put in the effort to make sure we weren't skewing the data. And then we do the net hours. So the number of nets that are open and the number of hours. So when we were starting out, it was 17 net hours per owl. We were trying all those weird locations for nets and didn't have success in many of them. In the peak year, it was only 10 net hours per owl. We kind of refined our system and there were a lot of owls moving. And in the bad year, it was 60 net hours per owl. So it was abysmal. It was hard to get volunteers to stay. For a comparison right now, this year, we're running at 4.15 net hours per owl. So it's a really, really good peak year. So I pulled up some other researchers' charts. So West Metro, their charts are very similar to ours. You can see the peak years are the same. I asked our researcher friend in Nova Scotia, his peak years are totally different than ours. And then I asked our folks out on the west coast of Vancouver Island near Victoria, and their peak years are different than ours as well. And what's crazy is their two stations are over 30 miles apart, and that peak year sort of coincided with a lot of fires. They think the owls got pushed to the coast, and their one station had 1,200 owls compared to their station that had 600. For comparison, our biggest year was just 100 between two stations. So a lot more owls moving along the west coast to those stations. Then another of our questions was whether they're nesting at Carpenter. I'm sad to say that so far our nest boxes haven't turned up any owls. We got great funding for the project from Tropical Wings and the Wisconsin Master Naturalist program. We have kestrels, but no saw-whet owls. And then they move at other times of year. And this is one exciting thing I won't talk about too long because it gets pretty technical, but we just put up a MODIS tower and we're getting some results, and we would love to put some MODIS on the owls. We got a grant from MOU and another grant from Tropical Wings. It's a super cool program, and I promise if you have questions, I'll answer them. But we do know it works. The Nova Scotia researcher put MODIS, a nanotransmitter, on an owl from a nest box in Nova Scotia, and it was recovered in the middle of summer, flying over the MODIS tower in Montreal, 490 miles away. We never would have known that without that tower acknowledging that signal. And so I'm going to click through the receivers because otherwise you guys are going to listen to me talk for a very long time, and I'm sure you have questions. We can use MODIS on songbirds, owls, butterflies, dragonflies, and bats. And our hypotheses, if you've been following, we know that they migrate through, specifically the Minnesota campus, also the Wisconsin campus. We have had zero success on both campuses with long-eared owls. We pretty much have given up. We know they pass through, but they're not interested in our nets. The St. Croix doesn't seem to act as a funnel, keeping birds on one shore versus the other, as we keep re-encountering birds that were banded in one state in the other state. And then the weather patterns. That one, still more questions than answers. There's so many things. Like last night, our Wisconsin campus had 15 owls in the nets before 10 o'clock, and we got one owl in the nets in Minnesota all night. So still many more questions to answer. No nesting yet. We're hoping they're going to start nesting. And then with MODIS, we hope to also be able to answer, are they moving through the region at other times of the year? And we have many, many more questions. You can see some abnormal pupils in there. And now I'll open it up to your questions. I apologize, that was a lot of information. I hope you're able to follow. And Michelle, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions right now in the chat, but let's open up to questions. I'm sure folks have some.
And yes, Dan, I do agree, they're very cute. And they have these brutal little talons, but it's hard to be upset when they're puncturing your hands because they are very cute.
Yeah, we're just enamored with our granddaughter talking. So when she says a sentence like that, we're just like falling over. So sorry, everyone. We're just kind of new to this. So yeah.
Jen, can you talk a little bit about the steps that you take to acclimate the owls after they've been captured, or to, kind of guide them through the process?
Yep, so there are many, many different stations and different ways to band. The North Central Bird Observatory folks sit outside in really, really warm clothes all night. At Carpenter, we're very fortunate we can band indoors, but we recognize that whether it's your headlamp or whether it's an overhead light or whether it's when you're looking with a black light at them, you've sometimes got that blindness when somebody takes a flash photo of you. We do not want our birds to fly out there and be temporarily blinded from the light indoors. So we actually have special owl boxes. They're mailing boxes, just white boxes. And so we plop them in that special owl box after they've been banded, and the whole banding takes a pretty short amount of time. But we plop them in that for 10 to 15 minutes so they can calm down, get their night vision back, and then we open it up and let them go when they're ready. We don't launch them like when you launch a rehabilitated bird into the sky or anything, or we don't put them on our arm or anything. Just open the box, let them look around, get comfortable, and then fly off. We also are very careful if we're fortunate to have multiple banding sites. So if we do hear barred owls, we can close our nets. The barred owls are known to eat saw-whet owls, and they'll actually be pretty good at trying to hunt the nets. So it's something that owl researchers watch out for a whole lot. We did have trouble one season. Somebody had dumped a cat on our property, so our researchers sat out at the nets to make sure that cat didn't get near the nets. So very, very careful. They're adorable little creatures, and when you're doing research with them, the last thing you want is for any of them to get hurt. So we go over and above. And then it looks like Sue Leaf was asking about the MODIS towers and the geolocators. So MODIS, there's these little nanotransmitters that they can even put on a monarch butterfly, and they have a sequence of signals that's repeats, and it's unique to that tag. So anytime, say, the monarch or the dragonfly or the owl flies by a receiving tower, that tower picks up that unique signal. You download that data, and then that data goes back to the researchers and the whole research community. And so the best example I can give of how it works is we funded a tower. It went up and it went live in August. Ben Douglas downloaded the data after a month, and we'd had 3 birds fly by that had nanotransmitters on them. We didn't know it. There was a blue jay that had been banded in 2019 on the North Shore, and it had a nano tag. There was a least flycatcher that had a nano tag from this year on the North Shore. And then there was a Swainson's thrush that was from the inland BC, British Columbia, that flew over. And all these birds, the thrush flew over at 4 in the morning. There's no way you would know that without having to capture that bird, and who else is banding at 4 in the morning? So, or high enough to catch the migratory thrush. So it's incredible how much we can learn about the migratory pathways, the stopover sites, wintering and breeding grounds with this new nanotech. Just really cool.
I have a question for you, Jen. So my neighbors have seen saw-whets pretty close. We live in the rural area. We've never seen them, and you say they're common. So any tips on viewing saw-whets?
Everybody has their skills, and finding saw-whets in the wild is definitely not my skill. I have a volunteer that's phenomenal at it. You look for whitewash, you look for conifers in the daytime, and then you also have to be really conscientious to not disturb them. They're moving so far, you don't want to interrupt their migratory route. But my best example of how tough they are to find is that first picture that was on the first slide. The guy was checking out this area. He knew owls had to be around. He looked and looked, didn't find anything. And he looked down, he saw a ear vertebrae on the ground, and he leaned down to pick it up to check it out, and stood up, and that owl was about a foot from his face. It had been sitting there the whole time. So they're great at camouflaging. I wish I had a secret weapon to find them, but I don't. It looks like Tim had a question about how long is the owl in captivity, and then how do we release it? Do we just open a window? They're in captivity a very short amount of time. We check our nets very frequently. So every 15 minutes we're out there. Some stations check them not as frequently. Us, we're just anxious. So we check them frequently, bring the bird in. All you do is you measure the wing chord, look at the eye color, look at the feathers, put the band on, and then you put it in the box and let it get reacclimatized to the dark. So it is usually less than 15 minutes, and we take them outside and open the box and let them go on their own steam. We don't launch them into the air or anything like that. So, yep, hope that answered that for you, Tim. We want them to get back out there, eat more mice, get fat, and keep migrating.
I have a question for you, Jen.
Sure.
So for kind of a life history of the Saw-whet owls, could you kind of give us that in kind of a story form? Like they're maybe starting with nesting, where they nest, what kind of nests, and then the time of year when they move through and where they go and what they eat, and then on the way back. That would be helpful for me.
Sure. Yep. They do nest even in the Twin Cities metro, but mostly you're going to find them up in the boreal forest. So northern Minnesota and further north into Canada. They have the nest boxes or the tree cavities that they'll nest in. They do nest March through at least April is when you're going to hear them and see them. We have not banded any on the northern migration back. And I've heard from other researchers, it's just a little more spread out than the fall migration. So they're going to nest, they're going to partition duties, dad's going to go get food, mom's going to incubate, they're going to fledge, then they're going to molt out of that like cute chocolate and cinnamon plumage and then start to disperse. I don't know who migrates first, whether it's dad, mom, or the chicks. With ospreys, there's been some great satellite telemetry research on how mom takes off first and leaves dad with the kids for a bit, and then the kids take off and then dad takes off. Mark Martel has done some fabulous research about that. Hopefully with the nanotech, we can learn more about who leaves first and how much they stay together. But then they migrate south and then come on back early in the new year. So.
And they're going, I think we had some people, we've had up to 50 participants and we're at 42 now. Yeah. And a lot of people were coming in like 10 minutes or so into the presentation. And so I don't know if you can easily find that picture of those chicks, and then also maybe reiterate that where they go when they migrate south. Some of our birds go to Omaha, but do they stay there? Or
so I don't know how long they stay in an area, but what is fascinating and just drives me crazy is, sorry, I don't know a faster way other than just clicking back to it. So I apologize for the crazy strobe screen. We get a relatively small number of owls at the confluence, just north of the cities where Warner Nature Center used to be. We get 23 owls in a night. They can get 61 owls in a night. And then you think of British Columbia or Hawk Ridge, and they can get, some centers will get 100 owls in a night. I don't know about Hawk Ridge, but that's some of the other centers. So it's, you're gonna find them nesting more further north, and in some areas they just move in huge numbers. So let's see. And we were looking for the one
way back at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're almost there. Sorry about that. There we go. With the chicks with their cute little chocolate faces and sort of cinnamon colored chests. And then Daniel had a great question on the chat about the calls and variations. The first year we were doing this, I thought there were a whole lot of cardinals and other birds making chip notes and things in the trees while we were banding. But it turns out that when the owls are migrating on big nights where there's a lot of owls, they make all sorts of cool little noises. So things that sound like songbirds, they make little barking noises. They'll sometimes be calling to each other. Our big night this year when we had 23 owls, it was incredible. When you go to the nets, you could hear at least 2 other owls giving their tooting call, that toot, toot, toot. But then you'd hear whining and barking and chipping, and they make all sorts of really neat noises. And I think on the Birds of North America online, it says there's 9 different vocalizations, but I would bet there's even more, because the noises you can hear in the woods on a good night are just really cool.
Does anyone else have any other questions for Jen?
Hopefully next year we're over this COVID craziness and you can come down for an owl banding program. We can't guarantee we're going to get owls, but the researchers are out checking the nets all the time. I actually have some folks here checking nets. Nobody's come in with an owl yet, but I get to talk about owls a whole lot. And then when we get an owl, we get to bring it in. Everybody can see it banded, and then we do the same process, let it go, and it's a whole lot of fun to see them up close. They're tiny and feisty and hot pink under black light.
I had one other question was, you had mentioned nest boxes, and is that something that people could put up and help with these owls or other owls, or other kind of conservation measures we could do to help our owl population? And a third question for me is, can you train them to go after those rodents that are in the house or around?
I wish I would have owls all over my living room, right? It's just, the nest boxes are great for kestrels and saw-whets, depending on where you put them. Cornell has a nest box page that's just phenomenal. It's the same size box. The saw-whet owls appear to be doing just fine. The one thing I'd say that you'd want to always think about is not to use rodent poison. I've had to rescue birds that had rat poison. They'd been poisoned, secondary poisoning. And you think of these little guys, they get the dad brings back one poisoned mouse, there goes the whole family. And same thing happens to red tails, great horned owls. It's just, snap traps are gross, but it's the way to go if you need to get rid of mice. Then you can toss that clean mouse out, somebody will eat it really fast, but no mouse poison, rat poison. And then planting native, of course, is always good, because you plant native, you support all the wildlife that then feeds the saw-whet owl eventually.
And someone asked if you get other bird species in the nets.
Not usually, and that's one of the most surprising things, Michelle. Even when we're doing the wood thrush study, you tend to only get the birds that the audio lure is calling. So the only time we'll get another bird in our nets for saw-whet owl banding is if we set the nets before dark. So usually it's just saw-whet owls. Other researchers, say up in Michigan or other places further north, could get a boreal owl, screech owl, sometimes long-eared owl. They'll all come in to check out the call. But in our 7 years so far, just saw-whet owls. One of the other researchers just reported getting a green-winged teal in their net. So I'm not quite sure how they did that, but not quite an owl.
Anyone else? Will you have the opportunity to do some modus banding of your own?
We hope so. So fundraising is the big first step. So the one tower is functional. We have $1,000 towards our other tower. So we're hoping to get that up soon. And then after that, we'll add that to our permit. So the way banding permits go, you can either have it for one species, multiple species. You can have it to put on an auxiliary marker or a data logger or anything like that. So you would have to let the federal government know that's what you want to do, but eventually we'd like to, and we'll work with some of the other collaborators to figure out which species is the best one to put nano tags on. I would love to work with our monarch and dragonfly partners, because I think that would be really cool to see where our Minnesota monarchs go. But right now it's stay tuned to the Minnesota Ornithologists Union, because one of our members is going to write a really good article all about MODIS and the efforts in the Midwest for our next newsletter.
Good deal.
Yeah. And Betsy, to volunteer to band, we do special training for anybody who volunteers. We don't take on any new volunteers right now with COVID, and that seems to be across the board. It's just you have to get too close to train people. And usually our volunteers have to start really slow. So doing the recording for a long time, not everybody has the dexterity to band or extract a bird from a net. So we're super careful on that, but it takes a long time. I've been doing it for 30 years to work up those skills, that dexterity to make sure the birds stay safe, and we're super stringent. But every once in a while we do take on new volunteers, but it does take quite a while to work up to those different levels. Did that answer that one okay?
So before we wrap it up, I would like to say that this is a resounding success, our first Zoom, and we couldn't have had a more excellent speaker tonight, Jen Vieth. I mean, we really, really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's very enlightening. I notice a friend is on from Riverside, California. Can anybody beat that for distance? And that definitely would never have happened at a Birds and Beer in Chisago City on a normal time. So, yeah. In fact, everyone, if they want to turn their video on just for a quick second to see everyone before we're out of here, might be kind of fun.
Hey, Gail from Victoria. So there's a really great owl bander out your way, so you'll have to look her up. Really, really cool research coming out of that way.
How many people? I don't see. Oh, 36.
Dan, I thought BYOB was bring your own bird.
You put a headphone on because I'm
Always count on you, Don.
Oh, sorry.
Good fun. Yeah.
About the video.
If you speak, it'll show up.
There's Larry. There's a bird bander. Larry LaPrey. How you doing?
Okay, yeah.
What time?
We band along the
Okay.
North Shore when we can get there in the summer. Found it would be a really great program. And thank you so much for coming to Wild River Audubon and presenting.
You're welcome. Thanks for doing the good research on birds on the North Shore. There's some amazing teams up there.
okay, honey, you have to turn off.
Well, Michelle, do you want to wrap it up if there's no more questions or?
Yeah, thanks again, everyone, for doing this tonight, for coming out and listening to Jen. Thank you, Jen. It was a wonderful presentation, as always. I always learn something new every time. And as Dan said, we'll be having another Wild River Zoom meeting coming up in November. And so stay, watch our page, watch our Facebook, and get our newsletter, and you'll find out when that will be. So thanks again, everyone, and have a good night.